Forward to the cloud. Assuming it's recording. So we're dealing with mobile device security. Now, mobile devices, man, it's a wide range of devices. It's not just phones. But for the purpose of this, they're leaning predominantly towards phones. But if we think about it in generalities, which is what they're doing, there's an area of networking, an area of computers, and we've got, they focus on it in the Florida frameworks. It's where they lay out, categorize all the concepts and what we teach and where we teach it. IoT falls under the programming domain. And IoT is the Internet of Things. Who came up with that name? But it's just so off because it is so generic. Internet of Things essentially means that we have devices that are connected remotely. Now, one can say, well, that's what networked devices are. Well, network devices, for the context of what we deal with in this course and what we deal with in computer hardware, network devices, we look at as host machines traditionally on a client-server network. So that's a network that contains clients, contains servers. Clients are considered hosts, and the servers are also considered hosts. But when we're talking about Internet of Things, we look at it a little bit different. Internet of Things could be on a peer-to-peer network, not necessarily client-server. Internet of Things may not be a client per se, or a traditional client, could be a node of sorts on a network that is just a sensor. That's all it is. It's just a sensor. It's activated remotely. The data is acquired on demand, and could be a wired network, could be a wireless network, it could be over a cellular network. It's a variety of different ways to connect IoT devices. And we see those devices all over. We've got refrigerators now that are IoT devices. I've got 200-gallon saltwater fish tank. It's an IoT device that I can connect an app on my phone. I actually have an app connected on my phone to the tank, where I could set up a camera in it if I wanted to. I didn't go to that extreme, but I've got sensors within that system that are connected to an application on my phone. Control my thermostat in the house remotely. And it's all it is just sensors that tell me what's going on. And it's not to the level that we have a client system that's running this huge operating system. They're very minimalistic and can be very, very small. So we're not just looking at, when we're talking about mobile devices, it's not just phones. From my perspective, go with this as we go through it and deal with the different aspects that they've got here. So when we're talking about mobile devices, it differs from a traditional device in that it's not tethered. You take it wherever you want. So we think about things that come under that umbrella: laptops, tablets, phones, watches, variety of IoT devices, cars, they're mobile devices now. These are things that have an operating system running on them traditionally, and they acquire data, they may carry and store data, and all of these things we need to treat the same way that we would treat the devices we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks that are traditionally tethered on a desk to a desk. There's a cable plugging it into the wall. They're not considered mobile devices. They're expected to be fixed positions. So when they're fixed positions, that means it's a single locale or a single location. And we can come up with rules, protocols to secure that device, whether it's a cable that locks it down to the desk, the biometrics we talked about just to get into the room where it is, the password to get on it. Well, a lot of those things just went right out the window because we've got a device that you walk into a restaurant and half the restaurant's got one of those devices sitting on the table in front of them. They may even be using mobile devices for you to order your food and pay for your food. Or they just walk up and say, here you go, and we'll bring the food to you. You go ahead and do the ordering and we'll bring it to you. And then when you're done, you go ahead and pay for it on that same device. So these devices are portable, mobile, and they are connected to networks. So all these things that we got to worry about relative to the operating system and securing a device on a network, wow, there's a lot to worry about. So the operating system itself, this may be another chapter or two ahead of where we're at, but the operating system itself, I don't dig super deep into the OSI, but the OSI model in the OS essentially is how the operating system and applications on the device are able to communicate over a network. And we've got protocols that we've got to follow. Things have to get packaged up a certain way. We've got to communicate a certain way. All these little rules that have to take place at each layer of the OSI. There's 7 different layers, and if we're just looking about TCP/IP, I think we're looking at 4 layers there. In the OSI model, there are ports that we talk through, communicate through, to send messages out of our computer, and they're received by whoever we're talking to, and then they've got a port or a variety of ports that they send messages out of, and then we receive them. Maybe the same port, like for a non-secure HTTP communication or an HTML file. It's a web page. Web page is sent via HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's the protocol, how things have to be done to send a web page from one device to another. So if I'm a web server, I've got to follow that protocol if I'm sending an HTML file to a client. By having these protocols in place, things should happen fairly smoothly, and bad things don't happen. Now, the computer has these virtual or logical ports. Think about it like I've got a business, and I've got a sign on the front door of the business that says deliveries on the side of the business, customers only in front. That's realistic. I don't want somebody delivering side of beef through the front door of the restaurant that I've got customers coming through. I don't want people taking garbage out the front door where I've got customers coming through. So there's certain things that happen on certain doors or entrances and exits on a business. It's the same kind of thing when we're talking about these ports on a computer, but they're not physical doors. The connection to the computer is that one wire. It's that Cat5 or Cat6 cable, or it could be a coax cable, depending on our network adapter. It's that network cable. So that's the one door that everything comes in and goes out of, the physical door, if you will. But we've got all of these logical ports that are electronic. They're ways for communication to come and go from our computers. And we've got to secure all of those things, not just on mobile devices, but on any of them. So the things that we've got to secure on a traditional client machine sitting in the office, we've got to do those same things on the mobile device. So let's start out. First area we want to deal with, how are we going to secure something? Now, if something is secure, there's a perception that it's secure because nobody can steal it, or it's secure because nobody has access to it. Well, that's not necessarily always the case. Things can be compromised and people didn't even lay their hands on it. So we've got to physically come up with ways to secure whatever we're dealing with. But the first things that we got to do is security. Part of security is reliability. Now, for something to be reliable, essentially all that means is it's there, ready to work when I expect it to work, when I need it, in every way that it would normally function. If anything's wrong and it doesn't work the way that I expect it to work, it's been compromised in some way, or there's a problem. And if it's safe and secure, it's always functioning the way I expect. So we dealt with, in the traditional client machine before, going through all those methods of backing up, having a restore disk, having a recovery disk, all these things that we could go through and do, same kind of things that we've got to do on mobile devices, but it doesn't necessarily work the exact same way. So the manufacturers, or say the big three, if we're talking about Google, Apple, and Microsoft, still plays in that domain to a degree. They each have systems available for you to back up your system. I was talking to my hardware course the other day, Tuesday, and my mother had reached out to me last weekend, said that her iPad had died. Well, something else for my class to repair. She said, no, it's not worth fixing. I'll see about that. And her first act was to go to the Apple store and say, hey, it's not working. At which point the tech or the person there, customer service representative, plugged it into their system and was able to pull all her data off of her device. She's got another device, it's all set up, and everything was pulled off the other one, put onto the new one. Now that's a novel concept that, hey, I've got something, it broke, and all I have to do is plug a wire into it, and everything that was in there digitally, I can retrieve it. It's a rare thing that can happen. Now, a lot of her stuff's backed up to the cloud. One of the things that happened with her device that she didn't realize was it was actually on and running. It's just that the digitizer doesn't work, meaning there's no screen. You can't see on an iPad. If there is no screen, there's no interaction between you and the system. For all you know, it's not even on. But hers was. So now that's just a matter of swapping out the digitizer and probably throwing a new battery in it. $50. So the things we need to take into consideration: which operating system we're dealing with. Are we dealing with Android, iOS, or something else? And depending on what it is that we're dealing with, the operating system itself, what methods do we have to back up the device? Now, if it's Android, that's a Google product, and we can just back up to the cloud through them. If it's Apple, I'll just back that up to their platform. And by doing that, all our stuff's on the cloud. We pull our SIM card out of the phone, plug it in a new phone, we're good. As long as we have, and it's the things that we talked about before, we have to back up on a regular basis. If everything we do is being backed up as we go, we're in great shape. Have your settings set to where you're backing up on a regular basis. You've got apps that'll come on and make sure that on a regular basis it's being taken care of for you. Update as regularly as you can, only after you've manually acknowledged and allowed the update. Don't have them work automatically, because all too often they'll have updates they push out, and it doesn't matter what OS they're talking about, whether it's Windows, Android, or iOS, Mac. They'll push updates out that are not good, and then people have to suffer as a result. So we want to make sure that we're updating when we allow the update and acknowledge the update. Your mobile device is going to have Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular connections. There's a variety of different ways that we can connect to other devices. And we've got to be aware of everything going on with those, because some of them we don't even think about. Let's say Bluetooth. My Bluetooth's on almost all the time. Is Bluetooth 100% safe? Can somebody access my device via Bluetooth without me knowing it? Well, it depends on settings. It really depends on the settings. And we've got to make sure that everything is set appropriately to deny anybody access to get to my device without me allowing it. Sync the data on a regular basis to a reliable source or location. As long as everything's backed up, synchronized, we should be good. If the device is stolen, that data is all on the cloud. I can go buy another device, sync to my cloud, I'm good. They shut down the IMEI on that device, and now nobody can effectively use that, at least not in this country. And it's paperweight. By going through and having all this stuff backed up, makes it easier for us to be able to go through and troubleshoot issues that may come up along the way. The same things when it comes to the boot sequence and how those things work. It's not 100% exactly the same on all operating systems, but functionally it's about the same. So there's step-by-step processes that the device goes through. It's a little different when we're talking about a mobile device and you're having to interact with the device through a screen digitizer, and it's all GUI. Makes it considerably different. We got to make sure that the OS is up to date. Sadly, they talk here about this whole end of life concept for operating systems. And essentially, I touched on it at one point previously. At some point, these vendors, whether it's Microsoft, Apple, whoever it is, the updates they provide you are primarily security updates. It's not that they're sending you updates to make your operating system better and easier for you to use. No, that's what the next operating system is for. They want you to buy that new one. The one you've already bought, they just want to try and keep it secure so they don't look bad. So at some point, it's usually every 3 years or so, they come out with a new version. And then 3 years later, they come out with another new version. And at some point, that tipping point's usually around 12 years. They say, you know what, you shouldn't be using this because it's too old, and we're not going to keep protecting you if you're not staying current. So you need to buy a new one or get a new operating system installed. So these devices age out, not because the hardware doesn't function anymore, but because the manufacturer has stopped ensuring that your operating system is secure. So those security updates, they're not going to send you anymore. And if they're not sending them to you anymore, at some point, you're open and somebody can get to your device. So it becomes a high-risk situation. For years, the operating system that was used by ATMs was Windows XP. So anytime you went to a bank and you interacted with the ATM, that was Windows XP that you were interacting with. But it didn't look like that. It looked really basic. It doesn't look like the computer that I had with Windows XP on it. But the application that was running on Windows XP is what you saw. And Windows XP was very stable and reliable. And when they came up with a new operating system, The manufacturers of the ATMs, now we're good with XP. We're happy with it. We want to keep that. So now we're up to Windows 8 now, 8.2, and you need to have this new stuff. The manufacturers of the ATM said, no, we're happy. We're sticking with what we got. And eventually, Microsoft said, we're not securing it anymore. We're not giving you any updates. We're not backing it, which forced the manufacturers of the ATMs to come up with an alternative. We've got to come up with another operating system that we can run our software on that'll do everything we need it to do. And it was a tough pill to swallow for them. So at some point, regardless of what you do with your antivirus and your passwords and all the things that you can manage and control, your backups and everything else, at some point, your operating system becomes no longer secure. So it's tough for people to wrap their head around that is what it is. But when we're talking about a mobile device that's connecting to networks all over, everywhere we go, it's constantly reaching out, listening to, hey, what kind of Bluetooth devices are over here? Hey, here's a list of all the things you can connect to. Here's all the Wi-Fi access points that you can connect to. It's all things that we've got to take into consideration. Now, I can go into the OS and check in my settings. I can go in and check to see the current status of my OS. Am I up to date? It's the same thing in iOS. And go in and see, am I updated? Am I on the latest update for my system? Now, depending on the provider you have, you may be up to date relative to the manufacturer of the OS, Google, Apple, whoever. But there may be other things relative to the device and the network that you're connected to that you may have to have updated. And they may send out an update that way. So you're not just dealing with updates that are coming from the manufacturer of the OS. There's also applications that you have running on the OS that are having to be updated, that are security updates. So we just go in and do the updates. I don't do them automatic. They just love saying that, don't they? I do them on a regular basis, but I have to acknowledge what they've done or what they want to do. I don't let it just go. So we can go in and check on a regular basis, or we can have it let us know, hey, time to do the update. Do you want to go ahead and do this right now? Yep, we'll go ahead and do it. And then we authorize it. Now, the applications that run on your device, there's something I hear a lot from students in my programming classes. They get really frustrated because they run a Mac computer or they're on Chromebook or some kind of non-Windows device. Now, Android devices, the software that I deal with when I teach computer programming classes, Android's very flexible when it comes to dealing with or interacting with the languages that we write code in. And you got to think that the applications, let's look at the application that it's the biggest application that we're dealing with is the operating system. And the operating system itself is just a translator. It's all it really is. It's a translator and a manager that works for me. It manages my computer devices, and it communicates with them in a language that I couldn't interact with them via that language. So it's translating for me, and it's presenting things on the screen that I can interact with. So there's all these different languages that it has to speak, and we call those languages drivers. The drivers are not all written in the same language, and the operating system has to talk to all of these devices via the driver, which is a translator. Now, all these different languages, we can't expect every computer, every operating system to know all of these different languages that exist. And when I say languages, I'm just using a phrase to describe what's taken place. All of the applications use programming languages, and they may not all be the same. All of the drivers are written in different sequences of code, and they're not even, a lot of them not even in the same language. They may be proprietary from the vendor. It's all crazy, the standardization or lack thereof. So the different languages that are being spoken or communicated with, we have to have some way to develop applications in these languages. Now, Apple came up with languages that they use. They use Swift. There's a few different languages they use, but they want all their stuff to be proprietary. They're funny about who they let see how things take place behind the scenes. And they're very selective about what they certify and how they certify. So, for example, I teach a few courses that use the Python programming language. Oh, you don't see Python in Macs. You just don't do things in there in Python. So the development kits, or they refer to it here as a software development kit. It's a lot of times we'll call it an IDE, an integrated development environment. These are applications, but it's not just a low-level application. They're very complex and very big applications because they've got to deal with so many different languages. And it's not that they deal with all the languages, but they've got a lot of different programming languages that they try to interact with. So Microsoft's got an SDK, it's Visual Studio. Android has their own Android Studio. And Apple has their own version of it. Now, depending on the SDK that you're dealing with, or the developer environment you're dealing with, Microsoft and Android, they let you get pretty deep into what's going on. Apple, not as deep by any stretch. So when we go and write software we're going to create an application to work on a device, we need to know the operating system that device is going to have running on it. We want to write an application that interacts with that operating system. So we've got to have that translation taking place there. And there's a certain degree of trust between the application and the OS, where if you install this application on the operating system, it implicitly allows certain things to take place, but if we set the settings, when you go to install those applications, if we set the settings correctly, I don't just install something without checking to see what is it that you're wanting to connect to. What do you need control over? Because an application can control all your devices, your phone, your contacts, your camera. I remember we had a faculty member teaching bachelor's courses that was running the cybersecurity lab for a few years. Very dangerous individual. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He knew how to hack very well. And he did a demo on a room full of people one time. And he said, I've got this device. And he says, I'm going to send a text message to this device. And if the person who has this device opens up that text message and clicks a link in that text message, I'm taking over their computer. And he says, or their device. So he's standing up in the front and he had somebody else hold the device. And he said, all right, we'll assume that's your phone and I'm going to send you a text message. And he sent it. That person opened it up, and in the message, it said something like, here's the important information I said I was going to get to you. Now, it came from somebody that he knew, so he trusted it. He clicked the link, and within seconds, he had access to the camera and had displayed on the projector, or via the projector in the room, what was available from the camera on that device. He engaged the camera and he could see whoever was in the room based on that hack. By clicking on that link, that deployed an application onto that device. And that's why we've got to go through all this cybersecurity training all the time. Any employer you work for is going to make you go through it over and over again to keep you aware of these things that take place. We talked about it last week, how often we're getting these emails. On the phones, on those mobile devices, we're getting text messages. We're getting messages in WhatsApp. We're getting Discord. We're getting them. Any application you're on, if they send you a message, that could allow you to deploy something inadvertently, and our security has been compromised at that point. So one of the things that we're able to do in these environments, in the development environments, is to emulate the OS and see, how does this work on the OS? Does it do what I need it to do? And we essentially create a virtual mobile device and deploy the software to it to see, will it work on this OS the way I expect it to work? So an emulator essentially is a clone of sorts of a given operating system. A lot of times we'll call it a virtual machine today. I can spin up a virtual machine in VMware, in Hyper-V in a Windows box, and I can essentially have running on my Windows 10 desktop, I can have an instance of Android running on here. I can have an instance of Mac. I can have an instance of Kali Linux running in a virtual environment and go do all the things that I need to do to it to test my software to see, does it work the way that I want it to work? So it's some of those things that we've got to do to make sure that the software does what it's supposed to be doing. a lot of stuff that they talk about here on this page is stuff we just talked about last week and the week before. Making sure that we go through those same types of backups to back up everything that we have. There's the image level backup to where it takes an image of whatever it is that we're dealing with. It could be hard drive. It could be some data that I'm getting an image of. We do our backups incremental, sequential, depending on how we've got it set up. Back up to the cloud. Know that I've got 4 different Google accounts that are synced up to my personal computer here at the house. And it's 3 works and my personal. So that's a lot of data that's backed up to the cloud. That's a lot of data that's potentially compromised depending on how I'm going about it. But I do have the ability to encrypt what I've got so that, yeah, that data exists in the cloud, but if anybody accessed it in the cloud, it's encrypted. They couldn't get into it. It's only accessible to me and through an application that I would have. So we can back up not just to the cloud, but I can also back up my Android device via a USB cable, USB-C to traditional USB, and boom, there we go. And I'm direct connected. It's about the fastest way to do it. Direct connected to that device, and I back up my files to that personal device, traditionally at the house. And from time to time, go sync that backup, get everything up to date on the backup. For Mac devices or Apple, you're doing it to iCloud. So you would have everything backed up to iCloud, and there's still some stuff on the device that may not be on iCloud, passwords and such. So there may be some issues there. Back up to a computer, you're not going to back up to a Windows device. That's not going to happen. So you're going to be limited to backing up an Apple device to a Mac device. So we can either do it USB or through the Lightning connections. All right. Go through and they're saying you can go through iTunes, connect, download the software to do your backup and sync everything up. Should something go bad, sometimes it can get cumbersome recovering from a backup. More times than not, people end up in some physical location getting help, getting things right. And it's the first step that my mom did last weekend. Head straight to the Apple store and have them help. And the first thing they said was, well, this ain't even worth fixing. You need to buy a new one. I'll sell you a new one right now. So we need to think about that. And if they did that, you'd be right here. They'll sell you a new one, and then they'll sync you up to the cloud. And I got you. All you do is just sign in right here, and we'll have everything populated for you in a short period of time. syncing it up to the original device. If the device is functioning fine, it shouldn't be an issue, but it's not always going to function fine. So there could be issues. Whatever it was that dictated that you're needing to recover a device, that's when it gets a little touchy. So the security measures that we got to have in place. Seems like every time I turn around, I hear about somebody tracking down their Apple device that was stolen, and they use an application that works off a GPS that'll tell them exactly where that device is. I see stories where somebody went, knocked on the door, said, yeah, my phone is here. It's like, wow. That's great when it comes to trying to recover something that was physically taken. If they can't get in the device, the fact they possess it, it's still secure if they cannot get into it. So we can digitally or electronically secure this device to where, yeah, all right, you got my device, but it's not going to do you any good because you can't get into it. I don't want anybody having my device because it's a utility. It's like I always carry a pocket knife on me as a tool. It's not a weapon, it's a tool. It's a utility device. Phone is the same thing. Helps me know what time it is, got my schedule, can help me figure out where I'm going with GPS and all these other things. So I've got to take that into consideration, and I want to make sure it's locked down digitally to where there's biometrics you've got to use to get onto it. And I always laugh when I see that commercial where the guy uses one of his toes as his biometric scan to get onto his phone because he didn't want anybody else thinking that it was his phone, it was his finger, and that if he fell asleep, oh, they'll just go ahead and hold his finger up to it and they'll get in. It's always being one step ahead. We secure it over the network with our Wi-Fi keys. We lock down the settings on our GPS, not our GPS, but our Bluetooth. All the applications that we deal with, we have to make sure that if our phone's sitting idle and we're not using it, it screen locks. And it's going to require biometrics to get into it. Swipes can be hacked. The PIN codes can be hacked. It's real hard for them to hack your biometrics. Make sure antivirus is always updated. Same kind of things we talked about before. OS updates, application updates. Passwords, that you do not use the same password on everything you got going on. A lot of times people will use VPNs or virtual private networks as their access. And it's a great way to secure your connection to another device. there it goes. So here I talked about applications that allow us to find that device. And they were talking about VPN from the standpoint you set that virtual private network connection up. And if you've got the app talking to that device over the VPN, nobody really knows that that connection's there. You spin up the app and you can control that device remotely. It's similar to you sharing your screen or sharing control of your desktop to a tech support. Works the same way, but you're connecting to an application that you have on another device so that you can track your mobile device. So whether you're talking iOS, Android, it's similar conceptually. So I talked a few times now about the device access controls, your lock screen. Make sure that's set right. Got to have either a swipe lock, PIN code lock. Both those can get hacked. Password can get hacked because people use the same password on everything. Pattern lock, same kind of deal. Fingerprint lock, it's a beautiful thing. Unless your hands get wet, you get something on your hands, then it won't work when you need to get into it. But you always have another backup to get in, some secondary system. You have facial recognition as well, and then there's the iris scans that are gaining popularity now. So we've got to go through and have as many ways to lock these things down. Like I said, if you're not using it, have a timeout and lock on its own. I know it's cumbersome, but it's a whole lot easier doing that. And when it's locked, it's just a paperweight to people. Unless they have your thumbprint and pop them back open again. Have the settings on the system set to where if somebody tries more than, let's say, 5 times, I like the number 5 when it comes to bad attempts, failed attempts. If you try more than 5 times, this system's locked. And there's software that you can have that the system would have to be unlocked remotely. You couldn't unlock that device manually from the device. As much as we can do to lock these things down, the better. I don't like this idea, enabled to erase all data after 10 failed sign-on attempts. Now, as long as your stuff's backed up to the cloud, okay, that can be a thing. If you've shot past the 10, now all of a sudden the phone's wiped. I don't know if that's going to make it easier on the person on the other end or more difficult on them because they still have your phone. Talked about the encryption aspect of it, where everything's encrypted. All the stuff on the cloud's encrypted, and people can't hack that as easily. Okay, so Microsoft certifies applications for Windows. Google certifies applications for Android. Apple certifies applications for iOS and Mac. And they've been tested. They're considered trusted, and they have a certificate associated with them. It's a digital certificate. Don't install stuff that has not been tested and certified by the operating system manufacturers. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no possibility of something shady taking place. It just means that up to that point, all things have been looking good, that they don't have any significant issues with that application. Now, I talked about it before. When you install these apps, be aware of what that app has access to. Location services, your contact list, your camera, whatever it may be. Make sure that you control what applications can access what. And that's just going into the settings on the device and fixing that. I don't want to use some bootleg application. I don't want to run the risk of somebody getting access to my root, which essentially they call it jailbreaking, and it used to be a thing. It still is to a degree, but it's essentially going in and getting into the OS, because the OS, for the most part, if we're talking about Android, it's open source. iOS is far more open than a Mac, traditional Mac OS, because they want people developing apps for it. So if somebody's able to get into that device through the jailbreak itself, there's software that we can connect to it to be able to get in. Essentially, the best way to look at it is break into the house, break into that device electronically or digitally. Now, if you're issued a mobile device by a corporation or a major company, they're going to have the right to look at everything you do on that device, because that is their device. They own it, and they have full rights to it. They can install software that watches everything you do. They want to protect their device. It's fairly common for corporations today to have software on their computer that when you get terminated or when they're about to terminate you, they lock you out of your computer remotely. Or it could be your phone, whatever the device may be. They shut you down, lock you out, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's similar to what we were talking about last week before, about those group policies and permissions that all of a sudden, hey, we're going to go ahead and let you go. And it's one little checkbox, apply. Well, it's the same thing on mobile devices. So they want to secure their network from the mobile device. If it's just a paperweight floating around, no worries. We want our device back. Please bring it back. Even if you don't, we've still got it locked down to where nobody can get in it, not even you, and it's only good to us. There's plenty of different ways that we can back up our devices. We're not limited to just these cloud things that we talked about before, but we've also got to always be thinking about how secure are these third-party things. So when it comes to troubleshooting mobile devices, they're not as easy to troubleshoot as, say, a desktop computer. We don't have as much access to the OS and the different utilities that we would traditionally have on a desktop. So we got to go about things a little bit different, but the logic's all about the same. What's it doing wrong? When was the last time that it worked correctly? What changed since then? Oh, I installed that one application. Where'd you get that from? My friend. So it's so many little things that could come into play. There's always, when we're talking about mobile devices, there's always going to be some support mechanism out there, some third-party vendor that works on behalf of Apple or Android, some place that we can take our device to that can get that device to somebody that can try to resolve whatever the issue may be. So much like a traditional desktop system, if it's not working right, go through the formal process of shutting it down and try to restart it. If it's not working right now, maybe if we start over, it'll work right. We just go do a soft reboot, restart. And that's not a hard shutdown. It doesn't go all the way down. It goes most of the way down and pops back up again. Now, close, that takes it all the way down and shuts everything off, and then you have to power it back up again. You may want to close some specific applications or uninstall some apps. It depends on what it is that has changed. But we just work our way back from when you noticed the problem to the last time that it worked right. Now, when you go through to start this thing back up again, it's going to go through and start each service one by one. Depending on the device, we may have different options relative to that boot. There could be some kind of safe boot. It just depends on the operating system. So Android, we've got a safe mode just similar to that safe mode we looked at on Windows. Comes up with less resources available, but at least it can help get us up and running to try and find out what's going on. And if there's something that's causing a problem, we can go in and potentially fix it. If not us, somebody else. Worst case scenario, we go through and reset the thing back to a factory reset. And then once we've done that, connect to the cloud, make it like it was before, back up, restore from the cloud. It's kind of like I always call it the Wayback Machine. We may have to wipe and do a fresh install, similar to doing a fresh install on a desktop. That happens sometimes. But what scares me on that is if something was so damaged that I've got to go do a fresh install, was it just digital damage where somebody deleted something or a system deleted something, or is there some physical issue that's manifesting itself? Corrupt sectors on the hard drive, whatever it may be, that just by reinstalling the operating system is not going to fix a physical malady. So we'll go through, we can do factory reset, go pull everything we need back off of the backup. And if it's Android or iOS, either way, it doesn't matter. We can pull what we need as long as we have it backed up there. So one of the big things we got to worry about on mobile devices, there's two things we really got to worry about. At least in my book, the two things I focus on the most. One's the environment, which involves heat and water. And the other is the applications that feed up our battery. As long as I keep the device cool and dry, I'm protecting it in that respect. Either one of those issues, hot temperatures or moisture, humidity, doesn't even have to be drops of water, it can just be humidity, can cause significant issues in the device. Now, applications, and we see it on desktop computers just the same way, applications can be very resource intensive. They use a lot of resources, or they cause the computer to have to work harder. There's a lot of processing taking place, and there's nothing really going on. And we've got to look to see what's running. And if we don't need it, turn it off. And depending on the system, we can go and use software to see what's using the electricity. We can do it in Task Manager and Windows Desktop, but we've got to have something, some third-party software, some application to be able to do it on a mobile device. One of the things we can do is go different applications, depending on if we're talking about iOS or if we're talking about Android, switch the phone into a mode that is more efficient, conserving electricity. It dims the screen. There's a variety of different things that it goes through to do to conserve power. We look to see how much space we have. The more stuff that you're storing, the less space you have to do what you need to do. The more the device actually has to work to get to the things that it needs. Every now and then, it's actually good to every now and then let your battery discharge, go way, way, way down, and then charge it up full again, as opposed to people that don't like to let their battery get below 80%. And that can potentially do more damage to the device, the frequent charging that way, up and down, short little. And talk about that a lot in 1150. The amount of heat generated when you're charging devices, the amount of heat generated when electricity flows, turning the computer on and off, it can be taxing on the physical structure of the device. If an application's not interacting with you, it could be a memory issue, it could be apps corrupt. You may have to uninstall and reinstall the application. It could be, and this does happen, where there's a resource that multiple applications are trying to use at the same time, and one application has modified excuse me, that resource in such a way that it doesn't function for the other applications that are using that shared resource. Not as common in certified apps. This is one of the reasons not to allow those rogue apps to get installed. About overheating, I talked about that. Bad signal. It's a common issue And you may want to update the firmware associated with a device. And this was that software that I was talking about, that for your cell provider. That's how you're talking on the network. And they will, from time to time, update your system so that you're working better with them. They're able to connect with you and do whatever they need to do. There is the possibility that you can get locked out. And once you're locked out, you may have to connect to Apple or Google to be able to get back into the device itself. So different security concerns. And remember, I said security comes in a variety of different forms. Excessive power drain. That's a security concern, because if it's a dead battery, that device is no longer reliable. Sluggish response time, same kind of thing. Slow data speeds, high traffic, unauthorized account access, or some of your personal information got out. Your social media account got hacked, whatever it may be. Funny messages or calls that pop in. All of a sudden, the system comes up and says you're about out of memory, or you're about to exceed your data usage limits. You could get spoofing, fake security warnings. That's fairly common these days. An app starts doing things that you wouldn't expect it to do. You may have internet or not, and that could be a result of some application that's taken over your phone. Your network connectivity, and by network, I don't mean the Wi-Fi connectivity, the cellular network connectivity. Your signal strength becomes poor, or you drop calls frequently. That could be malicious software running on your device that's hijacking your communication. All of a sudden, you see that you're connected to Wi-Fi that you didn't connect to, or Bluetooth device that you don't even know what it is. Issues. And for some reason, your camera's on, but you didn't turn it on. An application has taken over. Right? These are things that we traditionally wouldn't think of relative to security. Always think about, well, it's password protected. I keep it in my pocket. It's safe. I don't let it go anywhere. And done certain things. There's a lot of stuff that we've got to take into consideration when it comes to securing the mobile devices. Keep in mind what the SDK is, that we've got that solution development kit for both Apple and for Android. And there's also the Microsoft one as well, the Visual Studio. And there's a variety of different ways, but they're all very similar conceptually to things that we already deal with in traditional desktop environments. The things that we don't necessarily think about. It's new. We got two-factor authentication now, and that's not going to be far off from us getting into our device that we're going to have to go through some other type of authentication. I said this was a fairly short chapter.